and welcome to another episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. I am your host, AJ Alonso, and today we have 5 questions for Eric Kleiman. He's an account executive over at VanillaSoft. Before I go ahead and turn it over to Eric, like always, I have to turn it over to Alex first, see how he's doing, because that sets the tone for everything. If Alex is having a good day, we have a good podcast. If he's having a bad day, we actually probably still have a good podcast.
I was going to say, I don't think it matters that much, does it? But I am having a good day so far. So
That's good.
No worries there.
Phew, dodged a bullet. Like I said, our guest today is Eric Kleiman. He is an account executive over at VanillaSoft. We're going to talk with Eric today about getting a fresh perspective into B2B SaaS sales. Eric, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience real quick, give a bit of a background as to who you are, where you came from before you were in your current role, and we can get started.
Sure. So happy to be here, Alex and AJ. Appreciate the opportunity. And my background was mechanical engineering. So started down that road, ran into one statics class, and I was like, whew, this is pretty intense, and I, at the same time, started in the industry, was working in a mechanical engineering group, and then got pulled away to a reseller, which I didn't really understand what that industry or business was, but essentially they resold engineering design software to people. And so I was in a technical role, really enjoyed doing that, and then started traveling too much where I was away from family and friends. So started looking around for other jobs and came across a sales opportunity. They actually found me and said, hey, we like your technical background. Would you ever consider sales? I was like, no way, but after talking with a couple friends, they convinced me I should, at least give it a shot and try it out. And I can tell you, I feel like I'm, an accidental salesperson. I've heard people use that term before, but I love it. It's been so great. Been in sales now for about 14 years. So quite a while. And most of my sales journey has been in that reseller, manufacturing, engineering space.
Very cool. So you've had what I would describe as a very different experience than someone who maybe starts out and moves into that AE position in B2B SaaS. Typically, those individuals were SDRs or some type of pre-sales role in the SaaS space beforehand. So they kind of grew up a little bit in this industry. You being a transplant from a totally different industry, I would assume have some different perspectives on what it's like working within the SaaS space versus what you were doing previously. So talk a little bit about that. What was it like being an AE in the manufacturing space and the engineering space, and how is that really different from what you're seeing currently within your role at VanillaSoft?
Yeah. So I would say the big things that jump out on, what's different, the whole BDR, SDR flow and, working with account executives, that really didn't exist. There's always been inside sales teams, but typically in manufacturing, you have an inside sales team, they'll deal with their own sales opportunities and inbound things. Usually it's like smaller deals, maybe it's renewals of software, that type of thing. The account executives are usually the people, that we'd call like a hybrid model where they're working maybe remotely or they're working in the office part of the time, but then they're going out and visiting clients and they have their own territory. They have perhaps a set number of accounts and they're really given, those accounts. And then for a lot of the sales reps, it's just do your thing, go out there, make the calls, send the emails, make the in-person visits, do what you need to, pound the pavement, all those type of mindsets, and just bring in the sales and get things done. So as far as like someone sending you a meeting, or setting up meetings for you, that was a huge difference. I was just like, wow, this is amazing. Like people actually set up meetings for you, and then probably the other big difference, just with the sales side and the SaaS industry, I would say, is the technology investment is huge. There's a really big difference. So manufacturing, I think, is perhaps a little bit more behind in that way as far as the sales technology. There's other industries, that maybe are further behind, some not as far behind. I have friends in logistics that do sales. They're the same type of thing. It's maybe a little bit lagging compared to SaaS. So that one thing was just huge. The technology, what you could do, was just amazing. So that's a big one. I guess just to give one example here. So when I first started with selling in the manufacturing space and reseller space, this is how I learned cold calling. Sat down with my manager, and I had never done cold calling before. So we're sitting at a desk, close the office door. We have split headsets, and I'm dialing people live. And while they're on the phone, he's jotting down notes and speaking to me to ask the next question or say this thing. It was like trial by fire. It was brutal, but at the same time, it was a very good learning experience. Where nowadays you come into this and you have, I'll try not to mention different company names, but there's a number of options that you could use to record your calls. You can go back and review, you can search on keywords, right? It's just the technology to get better and to help you with sales. That's just one example of many, but yeah, it's really incredible.
Yeah, and that's definitely something I'd say, AJ, you and I have noticed tangentially. I'm really excited that we're having this conversation because I feel like from our sort of viewpoint in the SaaS space, we can see that there's industries that lag and things like that. But it's interesting you share that story, because when I started as an SDR in 2016, maybe it was a step up from what you were saying. Like, we had call recordings, but we didn't have anything that could like measure intent or analyze the tone of voice or any of these things that are happening now. So that sort of gives some perspective to anyone who maybe has been in the SaaS space for the last 5 to 10 years, how many years behind, you don't want to say an industry is like years behind, but how far behind technologically speaking, some industries are. And it's an interesting perspective when we're surrounded often by other SaaS competitors and softwares and things like that.
Yeah. SDRs don't know how good they have it these days. Like, Eric, you're talking about your experience in an industry that like, as you're saying, maybe is a little bit behind to the SaaS space, but like, when I started not too long ago in 2013, I had a very similar situation where like I learned how to cold call with a manager in the room physically with me, punching numbers into a Polycom phone. And maybe the manufacturing or engineering spaces haven't progressed to the point where they're using sentiment analysis or call recording software. But like in 10 short years here in SaaS, we've evolved from that to like, yeah, SDRs can asynchronously get coached by their managers from across the world via different pieces of technology. I would have never imagined something like that 10 years ago, let alone 15 in a totally different space. So it does speak to how quick it does move. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the interesting things, excuse me, that you pointed out were some of these cool differences. You're like, oh, people set up meetings for me, right? And some of the pros of moving into the SaaS space for manufacturing. I'm curious to hear if there were any things that were maybe more on the challenging side, things you missed about manufacturing that were easy to do or that you really enjoyed that when you were switching industries, you either lost or had trouble adjusting to.
Yeah, so that's a good question. The first things that I missed, maybe it was, I guess the one thing that comes to mind, because there's probably not a bunch of things that come to mind on things I missed, but one of the things I do enjoy is actually meeting people face to face, having that interaction with them, being able to know immediately, see their face, go around the office, walk out to the shop floor, see the manufacturing, how they're doing things. So that was a big one, which again, talking about technology, right? In the past couple of years, Zoom and all the different video manufacturing technology companies, we can still see people face to face, and ask people to turn their videos on so we can see how they're engaging or not engaging in the meeting. So that's good. I guess that's the one thing I missed. The challenge is, excuse me, when you switch, I would say it's just getting out of your comfort zone. It's going to be uncomfortable. I knew that it was going to be a challenge. It'd be easy to just stay in an industry, that you've known for years and years. And I think that also is a good thing, because if you're growing, if you're going to really stretch yourself, you're always going to be uncomfortable. The other thing which I think plays into that, and that's a challenge, when you're moving to a new industry, but even a new job, even a new role in the same company, right, with the same sales team, is just the imposter syndrome that you can get a lot, the lack of confidence. But everybody started out, where they were average or lame or maybe even bad. So it's just those type of things, like the uncomfort, the imposter syndrome. I say those are the challenging things, and maybe learning the new ideal customer profiles and industry terminology, that type of thing. So
Yeah, I mean, I hear a lot of people equate it to, by a lot, I mean like a handful. I'm not talking to millions of people about this, but like if you are on an NFL team and you learn your team's playbook and then you get traded to a different team, it's impossible for you to immediately pick everything up and start being as productive as you were previously. It takes time to really understand the playbook, how this team operates versus the team that you were on previously. You might be in the same space, but you're executing different plays. And I think for you, and some of the stuff that you had just mentioned there really resonated, because I was an SDR that was not all that great when they first started out. And imposter syndrome definitely took its hold, and it's hard to break out of that. But then there's like, I don't know, for me, there were some moments in my career where I was able to start to see some success when I shifted the industry that I was calling into, the ICP that I was calling into, and really start to understand the market, build up some confidence, and like that is the momentum that you need to start seeing success. I think that with individuals that shift industries, it's probably a bit of a larger gap that you have to hurdle, and a longer time before you can start seeing that, because you're not just taking some of the same like SDR or AE 101 level lessons and transplanting them to a different ICP industry company. You're taking a lot of the skills that you had to build as a salesperson and fully tweak them to meet a whole different type of selling. Like the way that you were talking about the self-sufficiency of an AE or a salesperson in your previous role, that self-sufficiency is valuable, but maybe some companies don't allow or expect their AEs to be that way. And so when they get into a new position and they try to do the things that are familiar to them, they try, it's rocking the boat. And managers are like, whoa, that's not how we do things here. So that can set you a little bit further back in terms of making that transition and seeing really how difficult it is to go from one place to another. So it's interesting that you brought that up. I don't know if there were any other like habits, I guess, that you had picked up previously that maybe you tried to bring into your current role that you were like, oh, hold on, like that doesn't translate here anymore.
Yeah, definitely there is. And I guess just before I answer that, I wanted to chime in with one other thing that came to mind. So one of the challenges too, and I think this is across the board, changing roles, industry, all that type of thing, but just being coachable, right? Like you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to fail and fail fast, which is a good thing. So really being coachable too, and not coming in with the mindset, which I've done before, where, hey, I know how to do this. I know how this should be done, or I know how to be successful. But you mentioned it, AJ, you come into a company, they're like, we already have our process figured out. We don't need the new guy, the new gal coming in and trying to do things their own way. So being coachable too at all times, whatever level you're at, I think is good. And then, yeah, some of the habits to break. So for me, again, it was a big switch with going to industries, but I've even learned this the hard way with just switching roles, is not asking enough questions. And that's like internally, so don't try to figure things out yourself so much. For me, I like to try to figure it out on my own. I don't want to lean on other people, but that can be a bad thing too. Like, you got to ask questions. You got to be willing to think you're going to sound dumb, but you actually aren't. Just keep asking people. Obviously ask like the leaders and people that are successful. I'm sure they have a lot of people hitting them up, but offer to, I was going to say, take them to lunch. Maybe you can't do that. DoorDash lunch or something, with them. And yeah, just ask them questions. So that was one thing that I really had to do, was just get used to asking questions, adapting to new processes. Obviously, learning to talk the language and stuff for a different industry, with different departments, different roles, personas, that type of thing. And then really getting strong enough with the technology. So hopefully that answers.
Yeah.
No,
I love that. I'm a huge proponent of using the resources that you have available to you, whether you're, an SDR or an AE at a company with other sales reps that you can, like you were talking about, buy them a coffee or get them a DoorDash gift card and see if you can pick their brain for 30 minutes about what's worked for them. Why are they so successful? What can you do to try and emulate that? You can even go outside of your company and look at the various online sales communities out there, because there's plenty of people in those communities that are willing to help. If SD Revolution, Sales Hacker, Rev Genius, like all of the people in those communities are there because they're like, the point of the community is to help everybody grow, right? And if you go in and you're asking questions, it's not looked at as annoying. It's looked at as, oh, this person wants to learn and grow, and I would like to help them achieve that. I think there's, to your point, right, there's a stigma around, like, if I ask too many questions, maybe I'll come across as annoying. I'm that annoying new sales rep that's looking to learn. Like, no one should ever think like that. That's a very antiquated idea, I think, of what that role is.
Yep, I completely agree. And that's a good point too. I mean, sales communities, like back when I started selling, right, I would have thought maybe that was a community of houses where most people were salespeople, right? Like, there was no sales community where you could get help like that. That type of thing is huge. It's a great resource.
I love that thought, because obviously we've been just on the internet for so long, but
right.
I love the idea of a sales community, just like a town where everyone moves for some industry, just like, yep, we're all just salespeople here. Oh, what do you guys sell? No, we're just salespeople. But yeah, have you gotten a chance to dive into either any of these communities, or do you have any sort of favorite resources that you've been able to tap into when you were shifting into the SaaS role?
Yep. So the sales communities, definitely, I dive into those, and could use them even more. I mean, they have so much, content and so many resources. I think they're fantastic. Another thing I think that's big is, and I'm kind of a podcast junkie, but I really enjoy podcasts. I love that I can play them at 1.5 times speed, when you're exercising, walking the dog, driving down the road, whatever. And my kids kind of laugh at me, they're like, what are you listening to? Because it's like this kind of fast, but I get used to it. So then when I slow it down, it sounds weird. But yeah, doing things like that. And I wish I would have had someone that pulled me aside early in my career and said, hey, if you invest in yourself more than your company does, it's going to make huge dividends. So another thing I think, and this is just a guess, but, probably most people, even young people, if you're coming out of college, you've already been hitting the books, right? You probably don't want to read too much anymore. But I think reading is one thing that uh, especially some of the younger people, it's a way to differentiate yourself. It's easy to do Audible. I like that. I just mentioned the podcast. That's easy, but there's a lot of content that's missed if you don't read. Blogs, obviously books, right? And that's like going to the top successful salesperson and asking them those questions. They share stuff that has made them, who they are today and got them to where they are. So there's that. There's Patreon groups that you can join for really cheap, and you're getting a steal of a deal. So yeah, there's a ton of ways to be successful. The information is out there. You just got to find it and then act upon it.
Maybe I can post show. I'll see if I can grab some of your favorites. We can put them in like the show notes, but I know that there's,
Yeah.
like you said, a ton of podcasts, a ton of books, tons of communities that, like you said, people wish more than anything they knew about before they got into the role, because it is such a vital component
Yeah.
of onboarding and just getting comfortable with being a sales rep, is knowing that like there are these resources available to you. If you have a question, if you're ever concerned about anything, like someone's probably answered it in some format or another. If you have access to it, then we talked about it. Building that confidence becomes so much easier.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
One of the other things that I know that you had brought it up a little bit earlier that I wanted to dive in to again, but one of the big differences between your previous role and this current role is the available technology that you had, not just like to do the job more efficiently, but like having access to data or tools so that you wouldn't have to be a self-sufficient. You can rely on something else to help you do your job and enable you to do it more effectively. Feel free to name names. I know you said you didn't want to do that earlier. Drop as many as you want. But that's one of the biggest differences I see in terms of what you were doing previously and what you're doing now, and kind of contribute to that resources idea of like what's available to you to help you do this job effectively. What are some of the coolest tools that you've been exposed to in your current role that you look at now and you're like, this would have changed the game for me in any type of previous role? How did we not know about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So just the whole tech stack term, right? I mean, that was fairly new. I hadn't heard that before, but I'm like, oh yeah, they have so much technology that it's like a whole stack of things, and it can really help you. So some of the coolest, I think most beneficial, things that I've come across, I'll just name some. So VanillaSoft is a sales engagement platform, more for the SMB, like mid-market. I know obviously there's SalesLoft, there's Outreach, that people work with, and just being able to automate a lot of those steps and put people in a cadence. That's another thing, a cadence or a sequence, right? Like those terms were never around. Like you could do 5 steps if you wanted, you could do 25 steps. It's really, in the space that I was in, and I think it's probably similar to others. It's like, I don't care how many steps it takes. You just keep after them until they close. Right. But you can figure out, as these companies have, like, how many steps does it take on average to get someone's attention, to, have a conversation with them, get them to a demo or to a discovery call, and move them forward. So that type of thing, sales engagement was huge. You can easily be twice as productive, templated emails, being able to see when people open them, and realize that, the technology today that has like buyer intent, which I know there's a lot of them out there, Zoom Info, Terminus, are a couple that I've become aware of. I know there's a bunch more, but like that type of stuff. We mentioned the call recordings. So I'm just giving love to everybody. Chorus, Gong, Refract, right? Videos, like Vidyard, Bomb. I mean, that's a huge difference. Like sending a video would have been a really big undertaking back in the day. LinkedIn Sales Navigator, being able to search and find people for that. Even technology like Connect and Sell, just, burning through numbers and stuff until you get a person live on the phone. Being able to search for contact information is so much easier. Again, Zoom Info is one of them, Seamless, Lead IQ, and I'm just scratching the surface here. I feel like, because I've seen so much technology, even like some of the apps I've bought, some apps that help on the phone. Before Gong and Chorus, I paid $10 for like a phone recording app on the phone because that was the only way I could record and listen to my calls to get better. But the technology, just arms you to be extremely successful. So that's another good thing, just to ask people, how are they using it? Because you can really use it to make your life easier. And I think a lot of it too is bringing over some of the marketing knowledge and data that they've been able to capture maybe longer than the sales team has, and now you can see some of that, which is fantastic. So extremely helpful.
Yeah.
It's fun. I was just gonna say before you jump in, Alex, it's funny that you mentioned you're just scratching the surface. I'll link it in the show notes, but Tenbound has their market map of like basically all of the available technologies within SaaS, whether it's sales engagement platform, call recording, blah blah blah. It just grows and grows and grows. There's new technology that pops up what seems like daily at this point. So to your point, I think it is super important to ask people, what do you use? How are you getting the most out of it? Why is this effective for you? Because
Right.
it is analysis paralysis. There is just so much out there. It's almost impossible to figure it out on your own at this point.
Yep.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you, you made me kind of curious when you brought up video. That sounded like the one that was the most, like, would have sounded the most outlandish when you were in manufacturing. What do you think would have happened if you used video prospecting in like a manufacturing sales role?
I think it would have been huge, just like it can be today. Engineers obviously are very smart people, busy. It can be difficult to earn their trust a lot of times. So as a salesperson, I think just having that video, maybe an image, or I know they have the animated kind of little images of your video. I think that would just be a great way to get their attention and obviously to stand out. I'm thinking years and years ago, like, some of the hurdles to get over would have been the size of the video. Could you actually attach it?
True.
If you didn't attach it, would they actually feel comfortable enough to click on the link and go somewhere else? So there's challenges, but yeah, I think video would have been great, just like it is today. I think it's a underused, still has lots of potential.
So what I'm getting is that like companies like BombBomb and Vidyard, like you mentioned, should probably heavily prospect into these more antiquated industries because there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it's like there's obviously the technology has allowed for videos just across the board to be so much more common, which is fantastic. But when you look at like LinkedIn, I'll use that as an example because I think it's very clear that there are so many lurkers, right? And I've been there and done that for a long time, and still trying to improve that. But you can put a video up there and maybe you don't think it's that successful. But then when you look at how many people actually viewed it instead of how many people commented or liked, I mean, it's a drastically huge imbalance. There's so many people that see it that you may never talk to, or at least not talk to this month, but maybe next month, you'll have the right content or say the right thing that gets their attention. So it's definitely good stuff.
Yeah. The ability to view impressions on LinkedIn especially has been super helpful just for understanding, especially on our side, on the marketing side, like what's working well, what's not. You can sort of look at that ratio from likes and comments to views, things like that. Sort of on that note, because I'm assuming LinkedIn is something you probably had to master more once you were in the SaaS sales role. So I'd love to dive a little bit into maybe some of the skills that you had to learn and had to learn quickly when you were making that transition, and which ones were sort of the most crucial to your success early on.
Sure. So skills you have to quickly master. I think switching roles, switching industries, again, leaving aside your assumptions and ego, and just being willing to adopt and fully dive into new processes. What's their sales process, learning and understanding the value props, the pitch, that type of thing, the problems that your solution solves or your product solves. Just really diving into that and learning those processes, I think, is huge. And messaging, learning that messaging is very big. And then I know we've said a lot, but again, the technology, like, how does this technology work? How is it going to benefit me in my day-to-day? And probably the biggest thing I looked at is, how does it benefit my prospecting and my outreach? Because that's a big part of the day. So just doing that consistently really, really was important and can make a difference.
Sorry, my dog is like, this is the back of the podcast that you guys don't get to see. He's like rubbing his back up against my leg. Like, please pet me. Please pet me. Frankie, relax, dude. It's okay. It's the perks of working from home, right?
That's right.
No, I love that there are some things that you recognized quickly that making that transition into the SaaS space where you were like, oh, like, and I'm sure you realized it through both experience and through talking to people, like, there are some things that I really need to focus on development and sort of like upskilling wise to make sure that I ramp at a pace that makes sense. And I think that's very translatable to a lot of people who are just jumping into the space for the first time, who don't have that experience. Like you were able to still pull from some foundational sales experience. Granted, a lot of it had to be rewritten in some capacity, but you still have that experience that a lot of people maybe jumping fresh out of college or transitioning from an industry where maybe sales wasn't their role in any capacity. They don't have that. So there's definitely a lot of parallels that I can imagine drawing there and some things that you were able to glean from that initial ramp period where you were like, oh, like this is super important, or like, why, if I didn't know about this, I never would have seen success in the first 30, 60, 90 days, whatever. Was there, I know you talked a lot about like making sure that you're getting uncomfortable, that you're doing things that scare you, that you're always learning. Are there any like actual tangible sales skills that you had previously that when you translated them into this role, you were like, oh, these are magnified, these are way more important than they were previously, or oh, these aren't all that important anymore? Like for field sales or face-to-face sales, sure. For SaaS sales in a remote environment, not so much.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think the skills and stuff that I realized you need and you're never going to get away from are like the human connection, right? Being trustworthy, building rapport, building trust quickly, kind of the foundational stuff where it's real easy to start leaning too much on the technology, and then it gets into, I think, the challenge of, well, is it really resonating? Is it personalized enough? Or can people pick up that it's just, a canned message? That's one thing you want to stay away from. So I think that's what you were looking for, AJ. But yeah, just those basic foundational skills. I mean, that's something that, across the board, you're definitely going to have to stick with, truly trying to help people find out what they want, and help them get that and make sure it's the best for them, and be willing to tell them, what, we're not the best fit. All those type of things I think are crucial.
Yeah,
So
I think, the truly trying to help people is so important. That's such a big point to make. Like when you're in this role, yes, you're tied to a number. Yes, you have goals that you have to hit, but like ultimately your job is to help people that need to be helped, and you think you can do it with your solution. So to that point, like knowing that you can just detach from the outcome and walk away from it because you don't think that it's actually going to help them achieve their goals or it's not going to be a great fit. I can't imagine that was very common in your previous role, but it is very much part of the rhetoric today.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm curious just for a second to dive a little bit more into the idea of personalization and just understanding maybe some of the nuances. So were you in the previous role still doing any like research beforehand, or was a lot of the personalization just as you built that rapport and as you talked to them figuring it out, versus now I mean, we train our SDRs obviously to do as much research, go on LinkedIn and search these people as much as possible. Is that a difference, or is there more similarity there between the industries than I'm imagining?
No, I think you're spot on, Alex, with that, because a lot of it, and this is going back, 10 years or so, a lot of times there wasn't a way to get a lot of personalization or make it personalized because you just didn't know, right? Other than reaching out to people, getting their attention, meeting them face to face. So yeah, that was one thing you would try to do. And the same thing with the research, like there was only so much that you had available to you that was meaningful for that particular role or that person. And so that's one thing that's a huge difference today. So having said that, the one thing that does remain the same with, research and personalization and, resonating your message, that type of thing, is I had a sales manager tell me this, and I'll never forget it because it made such a difference. But, there was different ways to research customers. And as the years went on, that became more and more important, as it should be, right? So you want to have a personalized message to people that resonates with their role and what they're trying to achieve. But he said to me, he said, look, he said, don't spend, 15 minutes trying to learn and research the company and the person when it's, a mid-level account, or maybe your lower account. The enterprise, top whales that you're going after, yeah, spend your time doing that. He said, but these others, he said, you could spend 15 minutes researching a company, and when you call the person, you go right to voicemail. And it happens so often. So I think that's a big difference, today is, put in the research, take time, show that you care, that you did your homework, but it doesn't have to be probably more than even 5 minutes, because the information is so readily available.
Yeah, I think Lead IQ came up with it, the 5-minute game or the 10-minute game or something along those lines, where it was like you start with I think it was 10. You start with 10 minutes and you give yourself that time for those larger kind of P1 accounts to go through research, figure stuff out, like really make sure that your message is personal, it's relevant to them. You do it. And then you do it again, you do it again. You get 6 of those done in an hour. And that means that in that hour, you've sent out 6 hyper-personalized, like very relevant, this message can only be for this person type activity. And then you get better at it. So it becomes the 9-minute game, and then the 8-minute game, and the 7 and 6 and 5. Because over time, yes, technology and our access to data get better, but you also just get better at research, and you know what to look out for. You can eyeball test some stuff versus having to spend time looking at a LinkedIn company description, for example. Yep. So I think it's important, yeah, to like do the work, but you get better at it and it becomes a lot easier, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I haven't heard of that game, but yeah, I like that. And that's always the goal, right? Is to be efficient, to know what you're looking for, and just get that time lower and lower. Yep.
Yeah. The last thing that I want to wrap the conversation up with is, and it stems from the first time that we talked together. We talked a little bit about personalization, but more importantly about relevance. And I think that this is something that's lost a lot on people who have been in this space for so long. They hear, I have to personalize my message or else. If it's not personalized, it's getting trashed. You coming in with a bit more of a fresh perspective, I think, have noticed that personalization is great, but relevance is more important than that. The way that you described it to me when we first spoke was like, let's say I get an email, right? And it's like, hey, AJ, I saw that you have a dog. He was just on this podcast right now. Saw that you have a dog. I also have a dog. That's great. Anyways, do you have 15 minutes to learn more about my solution? Like that's so disjointed, right? Like you hooked me, but there's no connection there to any kind of value or what your solution provides. Talk to me a little bit about like your experience with figuring out how important relevance is, and why that is such an important distinction to make between personalization and how it comes into play.
Yeah, so that's a fantastic topic, and I've read a lot about this too as well. And it is a fun one to discuss because, first of all, I would say obviously personalization is nice, right? Like, oh, they recognize that I have a dog, maybe they're a dog lover too, that type of thing. But years ago, there really wasn't much available as far as technology and processes to be able to quickly personalize something. A lot of people that were doing sales, you hear that kind of old school tactic. You go into the office and you look at their pictures, right? Look at, do they have trophies? Do they have, pictures of being out on the lake, on the boat or whatever. And then you come up with a story, and that was kind of the personalization. Well, a lot of times you didn't have that if you're just reaching out to people. So what really makes you stand out, and I think it's still the case, like you were saying, AJ, is, making it resonate with their world and making it relevant to them. Because if I had a stranger come up to me, which is essentially what you're doing, of course, like when you're cold calling, if you mention a problem or even a priority that you see in the industry that you're helping others with, you can quickly get their attention. If they have that same pain or they've experienced it before, or even others around them. And we ran into that a lot with engineers, again, very smart people doing their thing, building stuff. And you almost get the impression like, go away, you pesky salesperson. I'm not going to talk to you. So you had to get past that. And a lot of it was just with having a relevant message. I mean, if you could show that you understood their world and what they were facing, that would get their attention. And I remember having left multiple voicemails, sent multiple emails with different messages and stuff to this director of manufacturing and engineering at a plant. And I never got through until one day he called me up and he said, "Hey, you know what, let's meet. I saw that last email you sent over. I think it'd be good to meet." And I was so surprised, after, I don't know even how many touches it took. I wasn't using the cadence right, or so I didn't know if I was on touch 8 or step number 12, whatever. But I asked him, I said, "Well, what can you say that caught your attention, and what is it you're hoping to get from our meeting? Because I want to help out and I'd be happy to meet." And so he told me just in the last email, what hit home. And he came right out and said it. He said, the other meetings and stuff, or other emails, excuse me, he said, it just didn't get my attention, didn't resonate with me. He said, "But now this, I want to hear more about what you mentioned." So I think that's a simple example, just showing, if you have the message that resonates with what they're facing in their world, you'll get through, even if it's not personalized. That's just my opinion.
I love that. Yeah, I think relevance is king personally, but
Yep.
Like personalization is nice, but yeah, if it's not relevant to me, then delete every time.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Eric, thanks so much for being on the show today. I think that you bring a great perspective into this world in the way that maybe someone who, like I said, has grown up in it and kind of tangentially knows all of this stuff, they get an idea of what it's like outside of B2B SaaS. This is, like you said, tip of the iceberg. This is a small section of salespeople. There are millions upon millions of salespeople in tons of different industries that don't use any of these tactics. They don't have any of these tools. And so it's a little bit of, you don't know how good you have it, and a little bit of, well, based on what I heard on this episode today, I should probably double down on XYZ. So I think there's a lot of stuff in here that you mentioned while you were ramping up and learning this space, some of the habits that you had to break, some of the things that you learned that were crucial to your success. So dear listener, if you're this far into the episode, if you've got to the end here, make sure you check the show notes, because there's going to be a lot of resources in there. There's going to be a lot of tips and tricks so that you know what to focus on if you want to see success in the SDR or AE role within a SaaS company.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, thanks again for being here. If people want to connect with you, learn more about you, about VanillaSoft, where can they go? How can they get in touch with you?
Yep. So probably the same way everybody answers that question, right? Seems like everybody's on LinkedIn. I don't have a cool blog or anything or my own podcast, although I love all that stuff. But yeah, just LinkedIn, Eric Kleiman, Kleiman, and I'd be happy to connect if I can help or answer questions, or even tell you, don't do this because I hurt myself trying to do this in sales. I'm happy to help people out because I've always appreciated everybody that's helped me through the years. So yeah, be happy to connect.
Awesome. That's a heck of an offer to take people up on. Hey, did you try this? Yeah, it didn't work. Oh, okay. Good to know. Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here. Remember to subscribe to the Unsubscribe podcast. Get more of this type of content in your inbox, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks.